Welcome to VERITAS. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss our latest episodes. Please like this video, comment below with your thoughts, and share it with others seeking truth. For more exclusive content and to support our mission, visit VERITAS7.com.
The questions you always had. The answers you were never given. The place to seek the truth. Welcome to VERITAS.
Tonight on VERITAS, our special guest is Dr. Scott Kolbaba. He is a physician who has spent a lifetime balancing science and mystery. Every day he walks into hospital rooms filled with the hum of machines, the steady rhythm of monitors, and the fragile trust of people who want answers. But medicine, for all its charts and precision, leaves space for what no one can measure. Moments that refuse to be filed away under coincidence. Moments that doctors remember long after the discharge summary fades. Dr. Kolbaba began to notice a quiet pattern among his peers. Stories whispered after meetings, in cafeteria corners, and during long drives home from late-night shifts. Stories that carried weight and sometimes tears. A surgeon who feels guided to act before the data is clear. A patient who speaks of a scene she could not have seen. A doctor who senses a goodbye before the call ever comes. These were physicians who had seen too much to invent. Men and women who had given their lives to the measurable, yet had been touched by what cannot be graphed. For 3 years, Dr. Kolbaba listened. He collected their accounts. He studied them with the same care he once gave to x-rays and lab results. And what he found was a record of moments that challenge how we define evidence. Tonight, we enter that space between the known and the felt. We will ask what these events mean for science, for faith, and for the people who live at their intersection. We will consider whether healing sometimes begins before a doctor even enters the room. And we will listen for the quiet proof that lives where medicine meets mystery. Dr. Scott Kolbaba is coming up next. Welcome to VERITAS. If this is your first time listening, welcome home. To access tonight's full interview and all of our exclusive material, simply join the Veritas Plus family by clicking on the subscribe button at VERITAS7.com. While you're there, don't forget to visit the Veritas store, featuring a range of great products, including Focus Life Force Energy. Experience the benefits with a 15-day free trial of FLFE. No credit card required. Also, be sure to explore our enhanced Veritas Plus transcripts, offering full transcripts, comprehensive analysis, and exclusive insights for every episode. As a Veritas Plus member, you'll receive a 50% discount on these enhanced transcripts. Want to get in touch? Be a guest on the program? Suggest someone or share feedback? Just click the contact button at Veritas7.com. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's program. The latest book is Physicians' Untold Stories, miraculous experiences doctors are hesitant to share with their patients or anyone. And the website is physiciansuntoldstories.com. And directly from Wheaton, Illinois, I'd like to welcome Dr. Scott Kolbaba. Hello, doctor, and welcome to Veritas.
Hi, Mel. It's great to be here.
It's my pleasure. And I know it's been a few weeks back and forth. I honestly thought that maybe it's not going to happen this year, but I'm glad it did, because this is a wonderful story that you have to share with us today.
I think so. I think these are great stories. I agree.
So let's start simply. Before the book, Physicians Untold Stories, ever existed, did you have any sense that medicine and the miraculous might one day intersect in your own life?
I didn't think so. I was just an ordinary doc doing workaday stuff and seeing patients where, whatever comes through the door, and you never know what's coming through the door. But I never thought I would be doing something on the miraculous events that happen in doctors' lives. And, doctors don't talk about this stuff. They're kind of embarrassed to think that there is something that is potentially supernatural, godlike, whatever they call it. And so, the general conversation is not like this in doctors' lounges or things like that. So I never thought I'd be doing this, but I am.
So doctors don't talk about this. I have many friends who are doctors and the same. Many of them don't talk about it because they don't want their peers to ridicule them. They don't want to multiple reasons. Why do you think that is?
Well, these are ordinary docs that have a nice practice, the docs that I'm working with and I've worked with. And so they have nothing to gain by telling us a very strange, miraculous story about a premonition, about a dream, about to say that to a patient, I dreamed about you last week, and that's why I ordered this test. I mean, that would, if you had a doctor like that, you'd think this guy's a little bit on the offside. So I think that doctors were just afraid of losing their patients because these are very successful doctors. They have nothing to gain by telling these stories. And that brings up the question, well, why would they tell them to me, and why would they have them published in a book that goes, out through the international channels? And so I struggled with that for a little bit. Why would these doctors just tell me these stories? And I think there are two reasons. I think they trusted that I would do a good job and not report anything that's not true, because I've known most of these docs for 30 years. And the second reason is I think docs are generally, from my experience, are sappy do-gooders. That's what I call them. And I think they're genuinely interested. Most docs are genuinely interested in saving the world, doing something good. When you read the little blurb that doctors write on their applications for medical school, everyone wants to save the world and cure cancer and things like that. So I think these docs realized that these stories would inspire other people to believe that there's something else out there. And I think that feeling that I want to do good in the world, I want to help people overcome things, and people that are struggling, people that have cancer, people that are dying, need to know that there's something else out there, that they're going to a place that may be better than this. And I think that's what the doctors had in mind when they allowed me to print these stories.
Your book opens up with a story that changed everything, the lung scan that saved Taylor Johnson. Was that the eureka moment for you when you thought something or someone is guiding my hand here?
Yeah, there were about three occurrences that happened to me. That was one. One was an event that happened on vacation, and that was my mom's story. Did you learn about that one?
You're cutting off a little bit. You don't happen to have a microphone, do you?
I don't have a microphone.
There you go.
No.
Maybe when she got closer to the computer, the sound got better.
Okay.
If you could repeat that, that'd be great. Sorry.
Sure. So I'm happy to tell that story. There's a couple other stories that got me interested, but the Taylor Johnson story was an interesting one. I was just on call one night, and my patient called me from, I think it was Louisiana, and he was there on business, and he said, I've got this abdominal pain, and I need to talk to you about it. And it sounded pretty severe, so I said, you need to get to the emergency room. So he did, and they called me from the ER and said that he's got this abdominal pain. It sounded like gallbladder to me. It's right upper abdomen. He was a little nauseated with it. So they got all the studies, they got the blood test, they got the ultrasound, and everything was perfectly normal. So they gave him some morphine, I think, and got him feeling better, and they sent him out. And so I said, come back and see me when you get into town. So he did a couple of days later, and he was still having a right upper abdominal pain. And I'm thinking to myself, well, these people in Louisiana didn't know what they were doing. Obviously, he needs to have some fancier tests than they ordered there. And so I ordered some really sophisticated gallbladder tests and liver tests and x-rays and so forth, and everything came back perfectly normal. And I was a little frustrated because, you like to make a diagnosis, and I couldn't come up with anything that made sense except gallbladder, but there was nothing that showed up on the gallbladder test. So a couple of days later, I woke up really early in the morning, and I thought to myself, this guy needs a lung scan. Now, that didn't make any sense at all because he had abdominal pain. It wasn't chest pain at all. But I couldn't get that feeling out of my head. And it was just such a gnawing feeling that I finally called him up early, about 6:30 in the morning. And I said, Mr. Johnson, I think you need a lung scan. And he kind of laughed at me. So this is abdominal pain. Why are you doing a lung scan? And I said, well, I just had that feeling that we need to find something a little different. And I stuttered and mumbled a little bit, didn't quite know what to say, except I said, I really have a strong feeling about this. And he said, well, I can't do it today because I'm flying out to Denver. And I said, well, what time does your flight leave? He said, 2 o'clock. And I said, well, if I got you the lung scan before the morning was up, would that be okay? And he said, well, I still, and he hummed and hawed. And I finally said, I think this is important. So he said, okay, if you can get it right now, I'll go over to the hospital and get a lung scan. So I called the radiologist and I said, I need a lung scan right now. And he kind of laughed at me because, that's not how things work generally. But I said, I really feel strongly about this. Is there any way you can just squeeze them in? And he, after a long silence, he said, okay, send him over. So I sent him over. And about an hour later, I got this call. And he said, that was a great call, Scott. That's my first name. And I said, why? He said, well, he had a massive pulmonary embolus, a blood clot that was sitting on his diaphragm that could have killed him had he flown out today, because if he had another blood clot, that would have ended his life. So I put him in the ICU immediately. We gave him the blood thinners, and that literally saved his life. And so I thought to myself, this was really a bizarre occurrence. And I wonder if other doctors have these kinds of premonitions and bizarre occurrences. So I started to ask. And, doctors, again, were pretty hesitant. But I was able to interview about somewhere between 200 and 300 doctors, most in the doctor's lounge. And I came up with about 30 stories. And the criteria for my accepting these stories was if they gave me goosebumps or if they made me cry. Those were the stories I wanted to put in the book. And that's kind of what I did. And so that was the beginning. But there were a couple other occurrences that happened too.
But what did the patient say after all this happened?
Well, he was very grateful, and he couldn't believe that I came up with this diagnosis. I didn't tell him I had a premonition, but I still see him. I saw him, as a matter of fact, this last week. He's doing great. He's on blood thinners forever. He has a hereditary coagulation defect is what happened. And so when he was traveling to Louisiana, he got this blood clot. And again, he would have had other blood clots, no question. And had he flown to Denver that day, that would have probably ended his life. So it was really a divine intervention, I think. That's all I can say.
Exactly. Getting on a plane with a blood clot is very dangerous, isn't it?
It is, because blood clots occur on planes and quite commonly.
So when you told other physicians about what happened, instead of a skepticism, you found recognition, quiet nods, secret smile. Why do you think so many doctors keep these moments hidden?
Well, again, these are very successful doctors. They have no reason to go out on a limb or extend themselves with stories. And, we all know docs that tell stories and you kind of avoid them. They kind of exaggerate things and tell stories that are just on the edge. So, these ordinary doctors that I like to go to, that people, flock to because they're very bright and great docs, don't admit to having really bizarre, unusual experiences like dreams, like premonitions, like hearing a voice, seeing a apparition. Those are strange things. You have to admit that for an ordinary scientific doctor. And so that's why I think they've avoided telling these to very many people. And when I interviewed the docs, I would frequently say, how many people have you told this story to? And they would frequently say, well, I told my wife, I told my father, and that's it. I told no one else, which I thought was very interesting.
Medical doctors are scientists, and you believe in science, and it's very difficult to reconcile when something like this happens. So in a profession that is built on evidence, how do doctors make peace with the invisible evidence, those events that have no clinical explanation but are undeniably real?
I think there's a number of ways that doctors reconcile this. I've had one doctor who was a surgeon who told me after she had her unusual experience, she decided to read the Bible because she recognized that there was really something else out there. Other doctors with not as much faith may just realize that there's something else out there that's guiding their hand at times. And sometimes they may have one experience like this a whole lifetime and never have anything else. but they have difficulty reconciling. They just and it weighs on them too, because they cannot reconcile a scientific profession with things that are not scientific. And so it was. I think for the doctors, it was a little bit of a stretch to come up with an explanation. Some have had several events like this, but when you really talk to people, including patients, I think every family has probably had an experience that they can't quite explain scientifically. You probably have had that too in your family.
Want the full story? This is just part one. Now offering video interviews and discounted transcripts for members. Become a Veritas Plus member today at veritas7.com.
Family, I've had it in my family, and I think the doctors being involved with life and death decisions are sometimes guided a little bit more than people that don't have that responsibility.
If love is the unseen medicine that underpins every healing, do you think our hospitals have forgotten that simpler prescription?
Well, I think that is the case in many cases. I think many hospitals are getting back to those kinds of things where people are getting massages and they're bringing dogs around because people love to see dogs and love, there's some love there. But I think love is a phenomenal, strong, very strong healer of people. And I think if people that have love tend to do better. People that have lots of company, that are in the hospital with their friends and relatives visiting them, I think they do better than people that are lonely, that have no company. I think love is a very, very powerful thing in life.
I don't know if you ever heard of Dr. Peyo. It's actually a horse, and it's in Calais, France. And it's a horse that apparently came to this world to heal and just for therapy. But he's in a cancer hospital in Japan, and the results are immeasurable. So what is with that? What is it with animals? You mentioned dogs that are allowed to come to the hospitals. Sometimes the patient's dog that wants to be with the patient. I'm glad the hospitals are opening up to that.
I think they are. I think people love animals. I think animals have a sense about them that some people don't have. And so I think bringing that love into the hospital, bring that love into a person's life can be extremely healing. I have many patients that have lost their husband, like a little old lady, for example, 90 years old, lost her husband, is lonely at home. I've got one patient that got a little dog, and that just changed her life. She's suddenly healthier, with it more. And so I think love is a very healing power. And love between relatives, between family members, is also very, very healing and helpful.
The hospital, and people wonder why the dog has followed the ambulance.
That's interesting. I didn't catch all of that, but
well, that's right. I muted myself. Sorry. I meant to say I've heard of stories and I've seen the videos of they take the patient and probably the man of the house or what have you, and the dog cannot be allowed in the ambulance, but the dog continues following the ambulance all the way for miles to the hospital. And when they see them there, it's like they have to allow that dog to be with a patient.
Yes. Yeah. Again, animals in the hospital are very, very healing. And again, also love between people can be very healing. I've got an interesting story I can tell you about two docs that love each other if you want to listen to that one.
Of course. So, before you say that, it's so important to have relatives and loved ones. And I hate to bring back the COVID times, but this is one thing that I could never understand. I know of personally from my family and friends of relatives who died alone. And I wonder if having had the chance to have the patients present would have made them survive, or at least, dying in a better place.
No question. It was a tragedy to have, and we went through that ourselves, to have older folks in the hospital, especially dying of COVID, and I witnessed that. And that was so, so sad that they could not be with their relatives. I think that was a big mistake. And I think we could have been, in retrospect, a little more careful with masking and so forth with the relatives, just to be with the person that was dying. That was so, so sad. I agree.
Glad to hear that from you. Now let's go
Yeah.
back to that burned out bus, one of the most important stories. 40 girls, one of them your daughter, all spared.
Yes.
Do you believe that was
Yes.
divine intervention, or do you see it as something even more mysterious, like a moment of collective grace?
I think that was divine intervention. It was everyone that witnessed that was moved beyond words. My daughter was a show choir girl. So what they do is they dance and sing at the same time, which I would have a great deal of difficulty doing myself. And she had a performance a competition in Onalaska, Wisconsin. And so they took a bus there, and we left about an hour after the bus. And about 2 hours into the trip, I get a call on my cell phone from my daughter. She said, "Oh, Dad, there was just a little fire on the bus, but we're okay and we're fine. So don't worry about us. We'll meet you in Onalaska." So we didn't think too much about that, although she was a little strange on the phone. And my wife picked up on that. She's a lot more sensitive than I am generally. And so about an hour after that phone call, we saw a whole bunch of flashing lights and sirens and smoke. And we were driving on the expressway, and off to the side was this bus that was totally incinerated and still burning, with all these police cars and fire trucks around it. And my wife shouted, "That's Lucci's bus." Lucci's our daughter. And so we immediately called her and we said, "Lucci, what happened?" And she said, "Oh, Dad, this is a crazy, crazy thing. We're all fine. But what happened was the rear tire on the bus was flat, and that the flap from the rubber evidently caused friction and caused a fire in the back of the bus. So when the bus driver realized that, and there was smoke coming into the bus, he pulled off as soon as he could, but it was a little late, and the flames were very quickly underneath the bus. They were through the bus. There was a bus behind the girls that was coming with them, and they texted all the girls in the bus, it seems, and they were saying, "Your bus is on fire, get out, get out." They couldn't get out the back of the bus because that's where the fire was. So they had to get out through this one small door in the front of the bus, and there were 40 girls, and my daughter, Lucci, was in the very end of the bus. And so they were screaming. The floor was hot. It was filled with smoke, and the flames were getting larger and larger, and all of a sudden, the people in the back of the bus witnessed something that they just couldn't believe. Suddenly, it was like a giant hand that went over the first bus. The flames died down. The smoke cleared a little bit, and all the girls were able to get off the bus. And when the last girl jumped off the bus, Lucci was almost the last one, not quite, but when the last girl jumped off the bus, the flames swept through the bus in a huge roar and burned everything in the bus except the girls. The girls were totally saved. Everything burned. They had no chance of performing because all the costumes were burned. Everything was the underclothes, the makeup, and so forth was all gone. And so but everyone was safe, which was incredible. And I think everyone that saw that thought this as divine intervention. We got to Onalaska about 2:00 in the morning, and with a new bus that picked up the girls, and we realized then that that the performance couldn't go on, but the choir director, who didn't maybe was a little more optimistic than us, said, "We're going to perform tomorrow, like it or not." So a couple other miracles happened that night. The principal of our school was not there yet, and so he decided to look in the school for more costumes. And there were about 40 girls, so he found 25 silver costumes in the high school that were just there, unfitted or anything. My wife was the costume fitter, so she was in trouble. And then in the morning, they found in Onalaska High School, they found 25 other costumes that were almost identical, but they were purple, and the ones from our school were silver. A great contrast. people were doing crazy things, like they were coming into the room where the girls were, and donating their shoes and donating their clips. And we went to Walmart and got duct tape, and my wife was busily undoing costumes and sewing things, and it was an incredible scene. And one of the women said, "This must be what heaven's like, because everyone's pitching in, everyone's helping out." They were able to make the 11 o'clock performance. After some of the girls lost some of their outfits, my wife had to reduct tape them. But when they got down the stage, they performed incredibly well. And at the end, they announced the winners of this competition. And they had the second place winner was not us. The first place winner was not us. So the girls were reconciled that they did the best they could.
What about the strangers arriving with shoes at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, the girls used those shoes, and it was just a phenomenal effort. But the icing on the cake was when they brought out this huge trophy, about 6 feet high. That was the grand champion trophy for the whole competition, and it went to our school.
As a father of a daughter myself, I can tell it's hard for you to retell these stories, but I'm so glad you put it on the book, because these are incredible stories that people need to read.
They do. This is, these are things that I think many people, I think there are miracles and incredible coincidental circumstances that happen to us every single day. And one of the purposes of this book is to get people to look for those miracles in their lives. And they're there. And there are some spectacular ones. The ones in the book are the spectacular ones, but there are little ones that happen a lot every day. And I think if people look for those, they'll realize that there is a hand out there. I don't care what you call it, but there's a hand out there that sometimes will intervene in our lives in strange and wonderful ways.
And Lucci is one of 7, am I right? And how many grandchildren?
I've got 14 grandchildren. It's hard to believe. And 7 children. I'm not sure where they all came from, but I'm a doctor. I should know, I guess. But we've had a lot of fun with all of them. So
when you began collecting all these stories, and I love it, I talk to doctors and nurses who have written books, people near-death experiences, people in hospice. These stories fascinate me all the time. But were you surprised at how freely doctors open up once they knew you believed them?
I was surprised at the number of doctors that will volunteer these stories, that are ordinary doctors that aren't on the edge like some doctors will be to make up stories or to exaggerate a little bit. So, and I was surprised that these are real scientists. These are doctors that don't have any reason to tell these stories, but they did open up. And I think the reason is just what I mentioned, that they want to make sure that people know that there's something else out there that intervenes in our lives at times. So
let's talk about Dr. Harold Adolf, who played for help in Ethiopia, and within hours, a surgeon appeared chosen at random. What do you think prayer actually does in the unseen realm?
Well, I think I really believe that many prayers are answered. I've had some circumstances where prayers were answered unexpectedly and in strange and wonderful ways, and sometimes very quickly. And Harold Adolf was a true sappy do-gooder. He's a guy that donated and dedicated his life to helping the people in Ethiopia. He opened up a hospital there. He was the only surgeon in the hospital. He dedicated his whole life to helping the people of Ethiopia. And, it's a hard thing when you have people that rush to your hospital all day, all night. And so he was working incredibly hard. And after about 6 months of this, he said to himself, I can't do it anymore, because he was working on the weekends. He was working at nights. People would come in with a life-threatening condition that they had to operate on in the middle of the night. And he had a wonderful hospital with one light bulb for the operating room, which was kind of interesting. And if the light bulb went out, he just moved the patient to the window so that they could see with the light from the window. So Harold decided that he couldn't take any more. He had to quit. So he said a prayer one morning, and he said, Lord, I've done the best I could. I can't go on any further. I've got to stop. I'm burned out. if you can send me a competent doctor that can take over for me today, I'll stay. So he went to work. He was doing a goiter surgery in the operating room, and all of a sudden the operating door opens up. It's his wife there, and his wife never came to the operating room because she didn't like the sight of blood. So he knew there must be something significant there that caused his wife to open up that operating room door. And there was a guy standing there who was kind of unkempt, hair messy, a suit that was all wrinkled. And she said, "I want to introduce you to Dr. Moskowitz. He's a thoracic surgeon. He's come to take over for you." And he decided to come at this time, and he just showed up that day. Harold was so moved that he didn't know what to say, and all he could say was, "Thank you for coming. As soon as I finish the case, we'll talk." He wanted to say something profound, but he couldn't find the words to say anything profound. And Moskowitz's story was that
17 seasons of uncensored interviews. While you're hearing part 1 with ads, Veritas Plus members get part 2 immediately, plus video interviews and discounted transcripts. Become a Veritas Plus member today at veritas7.com.
had been operating in Brooklyn for a long time, and finally decided that he needed to do something to save the world, to help out people that were less fortunate than he. So he didn't know where to go, so he got the scientific method out. He got a map of the world. He put it on a table, turned it around 3 times, and pointed down with his eyes closed, and it landed on Ethiopia. He booked the next flight to Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, and he didn't know where to go there, so he opened the phone book to look for hospitals. He called the organizer of the hospital that Harold Adolph was at, and he said, "Where can I go?" And he said, "Well, why don't you go see Harold and see what he says?" So he flew to see Harold, and that was the day that he showed up, unbeknownst to Harold Adolph, and he took over Harold's practice. He was a perfect surgeon to do that because he knew all the stuff that he needed to do to take over for Adolph. And Adolph went in an R&R recovery for about a month, came back, was able to then work, and every 6 months he would take time off. But he finished about 40 years working in Ethiopia, helping the poor and the destitute with surgical problems, and must have saved thousands and thousands of lives. So that's what happened to Harold.
Can we call these people God's emissaries? In your experience, does heaven still send emissaries, and do we sometimes mistake them for synchronicity or coincidence or serendipity?
Well, I think God's emissaries are frequently us. I think we act as God's emissaries in many cases. Harold had that happen to him when he was visiting. He came to the United States to visit Moskowitz in his hospital, and he got lost in the subway. And this big, tall fellow came and said, I see you're lost. Can I help you find your way on this subway?" So he showed him all the stops and where to go, and then they both got off at a location which was about a block or 2 from the hospital where Moskowitz was operating. And Harold was so excited he ran up the stairs. The train left, and the only way to get away from that place was to go up the stairs or on the train. Well, the tall guy that came off the train didn't get back on the train, and Harold decided to go back and thank him for what he had done. And he realized he wasn't there. The train was gone. He didn't get on the train. And so he's convinced that was one of God's emissaries to guide him, at least for that one journey to see Moskowitz.
Incredible. Have you ever heard of stories of people who are in the operating room and they die, maybe for a few minutes, and, the doctor's already getting ready. I mean, it's, pronounced dead. And then they come back, and then the patient tells the doctors, "I heard everything you said. In fact, I saw you from the ceiling." And I've heard these stories multiple times. As a scientist, what do you say about that?
That's actually a common story, and one of my friends that I first got interested in writing this book told me that story at the very start of my interest in this book. Dave Mokel is his name. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He was operating on one of my patients. It was a foot surgery, an ankle surgery. And while they were giving her the anesthetic and so forth, she arrested on the table. And they started to do CPR. She was very overweight, like 350 pounds. And so Dr. Mokel, who's in charge of the code, decided that the fellow with the bright red hair that was doing CPR on her wasn't doing it adequately enough. So he took over and actually had to push him aside because, codes are not real polite events that at times. They're, they're life and death. And if you're in charge, you want to make sure things are done well. So he pushed this red-haired guy aside, started to do CPR himself. And the person, Mary, came back, never woke up that day, but woke up the next day in the cardiac intensive care unit. She had an arrest from the anesthetic, from the antibiotic that was given to her. And when Mokel was ready to discharge her the next day, she said to him, and Mokel was kind of in a hurry to get off to the office because he was late. And she said, did you know that I saw that red-haired guy that you pushed away? And Mokel had to sit down there after hearing that because she was totally eyes closed, unconscious. And then she mentioned about a dozen other things that no one could have imagined unless they were actually there. And the like the color of the stethoscope and the what the surgeon was doing at the time, and a number of things that you couldn't have made up. And so he also, she said, when I was unconscious, I rose to the top of the room. As you mentioned, that's fairly common to hear. And my grandmother came to visit me. My grandmother had been dead for a number of years. My grandmother told me that it wasn't my time, but I had to go back. But that if I became a nice person and was kind and considerate to people, that she would save me a special mansion where she was. Now, Mary, the person that was that arrested, was a terrible patient. I hate to admit that. But
did you say a terrible patient?
Terrible patient. She would do things like you'd be 5 minutes late in the office and she'd spend 10 minutes talking about why you're late.
Arguing with you. Yeah.
Arguing with me. And, I think, Mary, you need to have this done. Well, I don't need to have that done. And, I was one of those, when you saw her on the schedule, you would just dread to seeing her. After this arrest, she was the kindest, most considerate, gentle person in the world. She'd bring us cookies and all kinds of things like that. So she was truly changed from this near-death experience. And she survived, did very well, lived for a fairly lengthy time, ultimately died related to her obesity. But she lived for quite a while. And I suspect she's up there somewhere with the grandmother now in a place that is special for her because she was a changed person.
It really makes you wonder. Doing what I do, one of the most fascinating things for me is to study consciousness, which is so abstract to many people. What is your definition of consciousness?
Well, that's a very difficult thing because we're constantly studying consciousness and what causes consciousness. It's obviously a brain issue, but I don't think we have a good handle on what causes and why a person is in a coma, then they become conscious. There's a good friend of mine, John Messett, who's a gynecologist, who had a friend. His name was Bob Cornell. And Bob, they met every morning in the doctor's lounge. And Bob suddenly had a massive stroke and was in the intensive care unit. They didn't expect him to live. He was totally unconscious. So that's why I brought that story up. And John Messett would visit him every day. And, when you have a person that has a major disaster like that, you want to do something, but he felt totally helpless and not being able to do anything. What can you do to a person? And then the ICU, the intensivist in the ICU came by and said, we've decided that he's brain dead. And if he doesn't come around tomorrow, we're just going to pull the plug. So John Messett then decided, it was a couple of days, I guess, they were going to pull the plug. So John Messett decided to do what he could. And that was, Bob Cornell was a fisherman. He loved to fish. He knew every fishing hole in the whole United States. He knew what lure to use for any fish. And so that was his passion. So John Messett decided to talk to him about a fishing story that he'd never told him before, about fishing in the near the Great Slave Lake in Canada. And he went to the Mackenzie River and caught graylings, which are a little fish like a trout. And he kept telling Bob Cornell this story. Bob was totally brain dead, unconscious, not aware of anything. And every day he'd tell him a little bit about the story. And then the day that they were going to pull the plug, John Messett came to see him, and it was too late. The room was dark. The bed was taken down. So John Messett went to the nurse and said, "When did he die?" And the nurse laughed. And he was quite offended. And she said, "He didn't die. He woke up and he's down in the rehab unit." So when John Messett caught up with Bob Cornell finally in the rehab unit, Cornell said to him, he had a kind of a stuttering speech because he had a stroke that involved his speech center. And he said, "John, I want to thank you for telling me that story of the Greylings." And he went into great detail about the story that John Messett had told him when he was basically brain dead and unconscious. And he heard everything about it. And he said to him, "John, I had to make a decision when I was in that state. I could cross the bridge and leave the earth, or I could stay. And your stories were so exciting and so impressive to me that I decided to live and not to leave." And so, talk about being a consciousness. What is consciousness? Again, I don't think we really know, but I think there's more to consciousness than we'll know for a long time, I suspect.
This is an unrelated story, but I think you'd enjoy listening to it. Years ago, I interviewed Dr. Rick Strassman, the author of the book, The Spirit Molecule. He's a clinical psychiatrist and university professor in New Mexico. He told me he was experimenting with DMT, and one test subject came in, a young man, late 20s, early 30s, who was an attorney. So he went through let's call it a trip. When he came back, he said, "Doctor, I'm done with law. I'm going to go to medical school." And he became a gynecologist. And the doctor asked him, "Why?" In that vision, in that trip that I took, it was my job, my duty to be here on this planet to bring life to this world. And it's been a few years ago, and he just loves what he does. But do we have to go through a DMT trip in order for us to find, our true purpose? How do we do that without having to go through that? Because many people, I bet you, they wish they had a different profession.
That's very true. And, I've in my career here, I think one of the greatest things that we can do in this life is help someone else. And I think, the doctors that I interviewed were mostly sappy do-gooders. They were interested in doing something good in their lives and helping others. And I think that's one of the highest purposes that we have. There were a number of docs that did some crazy things. For example, Andy Rao, a cardiologist in his 50s. I told him a story about a little girl that we've gotten into adoption. We've adopted a bunch of kids. I'm not sure who anymore, but it doesn't matter. And I told him a story about a Romanian girl that was in an orphanage that was cold, and she had a space heater, and she had these plastic shoes on. And when she went to bed, she put the space heater close to her shoes, and the shoes melted on her feet, and she ended up with deformed feet and could not walk. And I told Andy Rao that this story, because we had connections, we adopted some kids from Romania, and so we had some connections there with the orphanage. And so he said, "Oh, that's really too bad. That no one would adopt her because of her deformities." But so about 2 days later, I get a call from Andy Rao, and he said, "Scott, I want to adopt that girl because we have the means to help her. We can provide education for her. We can provide the medical services for her. We have got good insurance. I've got additional money that if it takes that, we can get her feet fixed." And I thought that was an incredible offer, and that's very true for many of the docs that I associate with and that are part of this book. It turned out that girl was adopted by someone else, so he missed it by a day. But I think that offer was incredible and very typical for what I see.
A great story. You wrote that one physician saw a patient die and then returned describing music that, quote unquote, doesn't exist on Earth. Are these experiences telling us that consciousness again extends beyond the brain?
I think so. This was a guy. Cleveland is his name, and Cleveland was a little older. He had not taken good care of himself and had a renal failure, so he had to have a fistula put in, which is a connection where you can get dialysis through the fistula. It's a connection of arteries and veins. And the artery is a high pressure system. The vein is a low pressure system. So you have to be careful in doing all the right sutures to make sure it doesn't leak. Well, Cleveland got home one day after his creation of the fistula, and all of a sudden there was a suture became loose, excuse me, and he started to hemorrhage from this fistula badly. And before you know it, he was pretty much unconscious on the floor. His wife called the paramedics that then picked him up, and they radioed to our ER that he was on his way, but they didn't expect him to live because he had lost so much blood. He was pale as a ghost. So he arrived in the ER, and Robin Mraz, who's the ER doc, who told the story, said that he looked like a ghost, and they had to decide, should we even try to save his life, or should we just let him go? And so they decided, we'll go for it. So they got 6 units of blood. They gave him a ton of blood. They did CPR, and finally, after about an hour, he woke up. He opened his eyes, and the first thing he said is, "Can you move me back to that room that has that beautiful music?" And Robin Mraz said to him, "Well, we don't play music in the ER or the ED." So he was convinced that there was a music that he heard that was with instruments that he'd never heard before.
Loving this interview? We have 17 seasons of content just like this, plus part 2 of every episode. All ad-free for Veritas Plus members. Become a member today at veritas7.com.
Before, that was so beautiful, and the room was a kind of a clear, clean white room that he was lying in. So she's convinced, and so is the wife, that he wasn't part of the ER at the time. He was a little higher up. And that he was privileged to see what a little bit of heaven looks like.
Did he describe the music in detail?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. So that was a very interesting occurrence. And he wasn't a big music person. He just was an ordinary guy that was pretty sick and came in with this huge hemorrhage, but survived. And so the next time they actually saw him again, about 8 months later, and they saw the same doctor, Dr. Mraz, for an unrelated thing, a cold or something. And he was still complaining that they wouldn't move him back to that room where they had the beautiful music. And it was a funny situation again. So.
I don't mean to mix stories, but I think they go hand in hand with what you're writing. I used to be in the restaurant business for many years, and one of my customers, Elroy, this cowboy in his 60s, wonderful man, he told me the story of how he had a heart transplant about 10, 15 years before. And he said, before I got this heart transplant, I hated spicy food, but here I am eating spicy food in your restaurant. I didn't like rap. I hated that. I used to listen to country music and this and that. And all of a sudden, after I got the transplant, I started developing this taste for music and this and that. So he spoke to the family of the young man who perished in an accident. He was in his teens. And they said, "Oh, yeah, our son liked this music and liked this food and blah, blah, blah." As a doctor, do you think that our cells in our organs, they have their own brain and memories and consciousness?
There are so many things that are strange and crazy in this business that I would say generally no. But, I've gotten a whole book of stories that I would have said no to before. So I can say I don't know, but I'm not surprised. Not surprised.
So the story of Grandma Ohanian, is how you pronounce Ohanian?
Yeah.
So it's hunting, a midwife who appears 22 years after her death to save her grandchildren's life. Do you think love itself again can pierce the barrier between worlds?
I think, again, we talked about love being I think the most powerful force in the universe. And here's a lady, the Heitzlers are a great family. John Heitzler is a gynecologist. His wife was delivering their 5th child, and she was in labor at the time, and everything was going well. The wife had befriended a great deal her grandmother, Grandma O'Hanlon, who came from Ireland when the Irish and the Irish Catholics and the Irish Protestants were in great odds against each other. And so she came to the safety of the United States. And she developed a practice of midwifery. So she was a midwife for many, many years, and she was the kindest, most considerate person in the world. She would do things like if a person couldn't pay for her services, and she would stay with the family for a number of weeks after the baby was born, she'd say, "That's okay. If you can't pay for me, that's all right. I'll do it for free." And so when the midwife, Grandma Hanlon, became older and she couldn't practice anymore, she lived with Joan, the mother that's delivering the baby, for a long time. And Joan was a little girl, and she used to say, "If I could make it to Grandma Hanlon's lap one more time, I would be safe," because her mother, she'd do something naughty, and her mother would be after her, and she'd run to Grandma Hanlon's lap, and she'd feel like she was safe,
like old grandmas do.
Exactly. So she's delivering this baby. Everything came out fine, but afterwards the baby was good. But there was some retained placenta, so they had to do a little procedure to remove some of that retained placenta in the uterus, and that was very painful. So she asked if they could give her something for the pain. And in those days, trilene was the drug that they were using, and it's an anesthetic that you put a mask on and you administer it as a gas. And it puts a person into a deep unconsciousness. So they were ready to administer the trilene to her, and all of a sudden, little old Grandma Hanlon walks into the room with her little sweater vest, polka dot outfit, old lady shoes, and her hair up in the bun like she always had. And she stands at the end of the bed and shakes her head to Joan not to do that. And so Joan recognized the importance of not doing the trilene, so she pushed it away. Well, no one knew that Joan had eaten a large meal just before she went into labor.
Oh.
And about 2 minutes after she pushed the trilene away, which would have put her into a deep coma, a deep sleep, she vomited the whole meal. Had she been unconscious, she would have aspirated that. That could have been very serious or even fatal. So Joan realized that Grandma Hanlon had literally saved her life, and she said that I'd made it back to Grandma Hanlon's lap one more time. Only Grandma Hanlon had died 22 years before that.
Oh, again, these stories of people that come back. See, I grew up Catholic, and there are certain beliefs that we have that we cannot reconcile. For example,
Yes.
They say there's others who say reincarnation is true and this and that. But it makes you wonder if some people stay around just watching over us like angels, just to give us that little nudge to, hey, wait a second before you cross the street, or wait 2 seconds after the green light comes up, because there's a truck coming by. Do you see that a lot?
That happens occasionally. And the big question is, why does it happen to some people and not to others? Why is someone helped? My partner, for example, was doing a pre-op on a guy, and he does a lot of pre-ops for the orthopedic surgeons. And so this is going to be a total joint surgery. And so he finished the pre-op, cleared the person for surgery. And then after he got home, he kept this gnawing feeling in his head. There's something I need to do here. I need to call him, and he needs I think he needs a stress test. So he finally called the guy up that evening, and he said, I know I cleared you for surgery, but I think we need to do a stress test. Well, the guy was pretty upset about that. He was just already cleared. He was ready for the surgery in the next week or so. But my partner was pretty persistent, and said, you need to have a stress test. So they finally did a stress test. He failed it badly. Required a bypass surgery, and he probably would have died had he gone to surgery, because he had a very, very narrowed coronary artery that would have been basically the widowmaker had he gone for surgery. So I think there's There's something to a little voice or something that looks after us and helps us. And I think sometimes that could also be a relative that, like with Grandma Hanlon's case, that is aware of what we're doing and helps us. Sometimes it doesn't. And the question is, always the question is, why does someone get help and why does someone not get help? The tsunami, for example, in Thailand, why did some people that Sunday go up into the mountains to have their church and others didn't, that were then killed? And I don't think we know the answer to that. And hopefully at some point we will. But that's a question I get quite a bit. Why was this person helped and someone not? And I can't answer that.
I remember those stories, true, in the Sumatra and in Indonesia tsunami.
Yes.
Whole tribes were going up there days before, and the only ones who were left behind were the elderly that they could not take up there. And they were the ones who died. So aside from animals, I've been told they were following the animals. And we have to look at what animals do because they're the ones with that sixth sense that something happened to us. We used to have that and it's been removed from us.
I think we did. And I think children have that more than adults. I think children have that sense too. I've had children say, they go into a graveyard sometimes, and we've had children say, I saw some people here that no one else saw. And so I think children are a little closer to the hereafter or where they came from than adults are in many cases. And I think we lose that sense as we get older and we become a little jaded and not as open to miraculous events, miracles.
Is it that we lose that, or is it society that tells us, oh, you're speaking nonsense, don't say that? And then they just, as a defense mechanism, they just stop manifesting what comes to mind.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. And I think that was one of the things that doctors also, one of the reasons doctors don't come across and tell these miraculous stories, because society would say, you're crazy. And they don't want to be labeled as kind of a strange individual that has dreams and premonitions and so forth. So I think it's the same thing, but I think it's both. I think we lose that ability, and I think we're programmed by society not to admit that there are miraculous things that happen out there.
And you never know when your actions might turn into a miracle later in life. I know of this story that happened many years ago of a fireman that went to an apartment complex, and then the whole building was engulfed. And he said he heard from the mother saying, my child is still there. But no, you can't get in. There's no way. You cannot get in. He still went in. He saved a 4-year-old little boy. And 20 years later, this fireman was retired, dining at a restaurant with his family. He choked on a piece of a bone or what have you. Nobody around to help. Somebody from the kitchen jumped in, did the Heimlich maneuver, and saved him. And it just so happened that young man in the kitchen was a part-time paramedic who happens to be the child that the fireman saved. Yeah.
I've heard those kinds of stories not uncommonly. And that's, isn't that something that gives you goosebumps when you hear that kind of stuff? And it does happen. So I think, it's amazing that one little comment, one little thing that we do that we may not recognize as significant can change a life. I'm in a position occasionally, like it or not, I kind of am in a position of authority, although I don't like to admit it. And there are little comments that I might make to someone that I never realized the significance. For example, I had a guy that I took care of for a long time who was a smoker, and he was moving away to a different part of the country for a job. And I said to him on his last visit, you should quit smoking. You'd be a lot healthier like that. And so it was just a little side comment. I say that to lots of people that are smokers in my practice. And I didn't think much of that. And about 20 years later, he came back to visit me here in my office. And he said, I'm just visiting, and I wanted to stop by and see you. And I said, well, that's great. And I remember how big a smoker he was. And I said, well, are you still smoking? He said, no, I quit. And I always like to find out what made a person, finally give up the habit. And he said, well, you told me. I
Wow.
said, you mean that last comment that I said to you before you left? And then you put your cigarettes down. He said, I didn't, after that, I didn't smoke one bit. So it's amazing the little comments that we may have that you never realize how powerful they might be. Words are very powerful. And it was for this guy, and that probably saved his life literally because, he was a big time smoker, and I'm sure he would have had some other disaster happen, a heart attack or a lung cancer or something in that 20 years that he was still smoking, but he wasn't. Amazing.
What a great story. Dr. Mendenhall's and freezing to death, only to comfort a father whose son had frozen, another story in your book. That reads like a divine, can we call it choreography? Is suffering sometimes part of a sacred equation we can't see until much later?
Well, I think so. I think, when you think about the events that happen in each of our lives, where do we grow the most? Do we grow when we're making lots of money, we're having a lot of fun, we're able to go on vacations and so forth? No, it's the events that are the tragedies, the disasters that cause us to grow and progress. And that's unfortunate, but that I think is universally true. Mendenhall was a orthopedic surgeon. And the funny thing about Mendenhall, he's a great guy. I love him. And he said to me, when I was interviewing for medical school, I tried to decide what kind of specialty I'd go into. And so he said, I made rounds with an internist, and he was busy working all day, and I made rounds with somebody else. And then I finally made rounds with an orthopedic surgeon. He said, this guy did surgery in the morning. He did a couple hours of surgery, went to the office and did some office work and saw some patients in the office. Then he went fishing. And he said, that's the specialty I want to go into so I can be a fisherman. So Mendenhall was pretty involved with the kids and the Boy Scouts and hiking and outdoor activities. And so one day they decided to go hiking in the mountains in Utah. And they got up about 12,000 feet. It was pretty high. And all of a sudden, a blizzard hit. And the weather became very cold, and they didn't anticipate that. So Mendenhall started to get mountain sickness. He started to get wheezy. So he couldn't easily walk down the path. So he said, he told the leaders, take the boys out of the mountain. It's dangerous to be here. I'll get my sleeping bag and just rest, and you can come and get me when the blizzard's over. So he bundled up in the sleeping bag, but it got colder and colder and colder. And Mendenhall tells me that he recalls reading about freezing to death in medical school. And freezing to death is actually a very pleasant experience, he said. It's where you suddenly get chilled very, very badly. You start to chill, and it's a teeth-chattering chill. But after that, everything becomes calm. The chills go away. You get drowsy. You fall asleep, and then there's no pain at all. And he was so he recognized that he was freezing to death on this mountain. Well, all of a sudden, he was awakened by a mounted police, a Mountie that was coming down the mountain in his horse. And he woke up Mendenhall, and Mendenhall was a little bit angry that he woke him up because it was so pleasant that he was lying there sleeping and freezing to death that he had him get up on the horse. He took him down to the first aid station. They rushed him off to the hospital. He had lots of issues, pulmonary edema from his mountain altitude sickness. He was, frostbitten, but he survived. And he recalls that was, a very pleasant experience, freezing to death. Okay, if you can describe that as a pleasant experience. Well, 5 years later, he decided to go into the hospital to make rounds. And instead, he did something that he'd never done before. He went to his office first. Now, this was like at 6 o'clock in the morning. There was no one in the office. He had nothing to do in the office, and he had no idea why he decided to go to the office, which was close to the hospital, but it wasn't part of the hospital. He knew he had rounds to make, but he sat there for a while and was wondering why the heck he was sitting there. And all of a sudden, he hears this banging on the back door of his office. And he went to the door, and there was a guy there, a younger fellow that was in tears and just totally distraught. His hair was disheveled. His coat was not buttoned. And he said, "Come on in." And he said to Mendenhall, "I have something that's terrible that happened to me." And he said, "Well, sit down and let's talk about it." And he said, "My son was just found frozen to death." He was on a camping trip and he got lost in the mountains, and they found him frozen to death. And I can't imagine what terrible pain he went through in freezing to death. And Mendenhall said to him, "Please sit down, and I know what to say to you." I had the same experience when I was hiking in the mountains, and I was experiencing freezing to death. I was saved, fortunately, but freezing to death is not a painful experience. You fall asleep, and there's no pain associated with that at all. And and he said, "I think that's why you happened to knock on my door." Now, the door he knocked on was a series. There were a series of office condominiums. There were probably a dozen. And why he picked that one door to knock on, no one knows. But Mendenhall was able to calm him down, to reassure him that his son did not suffer at all with that experience, even though he did die, which is very sad. But he was not in pain. And that the father was so reassured that he was able to dry up his tears and leave the office, and thanked Mendenhall. They never saw either of them again. Mendenhall watched the news that night, and they had the story of the boy that had frozen to death on the news. But he now knows why he was directed to go to that office condominium and be there and wait for about a half hour before this fellow knocked, and was able to reassure him and comfort him. So I think that was divine intervention.
So he brought peace to the man.
Yeah, he did.
It's reassuring to know all these people who perished on the way to the Everest pinnacle, that they're still there. And now yes. I'm glad to hear that perhaps they did not suffer as many people would not have thought. But we have to take our one and only. Well, before the break, that story of Mary, your insufferable patient who then turned. Was that Mary, the one who? Okay, so this is almost like Scrooge's redemption in A Christmas Carol. Why do you think brushes with death so often ignite profound moral transformation? I hear all these stories that people change, almost as if they saw a mirror of themselves, and they said, "If I have a chance to come back, I'll do the opposite."
I think that's very true. I think it's the story of Scrooge. It's literally the story of Scrooge, where you have a frightening, dramatic experience, and it kind of shocks you to change your whole way. I've seen many people that go through life and death experiences, and they're suddenly different people, and they realize what's important in life, and screaming and crying about a person late for an appointment and so forth is not what's important. And I think when they become close to death and they realize really what's important in this life, it's not that. It's probably more like being kind, considerate, and helping someone else that's in trouble.
So we have to take our one and only break, and when we come back, we have more great stories. But physicians untold stories, miraculous experiences doctors are hesitant to share with their patients or anyone. How come people buy the book? And I believe you have others, children's books as well, right?
Yeah, Clara's Magic Garden. It's a book we just published about a little girl that, I taught Sunday school for a while, and I realized that little girls frequently don't think they're pretty enough. They don't have straight hair or curly hair. They don't have any friends and so forth. So this is about a little girl that thinks that she's like that. And then she plants this little bush in the garden, and the bush is kind of a plain, ordinary bush. All the plants in the garden that are beautiful flowers and so forth think the bush is kind of plain and ordinary like she is. And then at the end of the season, the bush turns into a burning bush. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's the most beautiful thing in the garden. And she realizes, well, maybe I'm special too. And so she comes around and finally realizes that even though I may not be have curly hair or a long nose or whatever, that I'm special too. And so that's the gist of the book.
So wonderful. Well, one more hour to come with Dr. Scott Kolbaba. This is Mel, and you are listening to Veritas. Don't go anywhere. Here's a track from Truth Frequency. You won't hear anywhere else. If you like what you hear, you can get the full track at veritas7.com on the page for today's guest.
In a quiet room with monitors, a call was made too soon. No reason they could measure, but it saved a life that knew. A scan was added early, no symptom gave it weight. But something pushed the schedule, and that small shift sealed her fate. This is the quiet proof, the kind that leaves no mark, a choice without a reason that still hits the heart. It won't be found in textbooks, no lab can make it clear. But sometimes what we follow is more than what appears. He spoke about that morning to friends who'd seen the same. Stories kept in silence, no need to place the blame. They've seen things they don't mention to people outside walls, but those nights still stay with them like paintings in the halls. This is the quiet proof, the facts that won't align, the moment that defies the odds and bends the line of time. It's not about belief or charts or point of view, but what they've seen or nothing should bring someone back through. Survives the fire, the call comes just in time. A stranger brings the answer before there was a sign. He stood inside the silence when medicine fell short, and still the pulse restarted with nothing to report. This is the quiet proof, the reason they still stay, to hold a hand at midnight, to face another day. It's not a perfect science, but it's the kind that's true. When people come back breathing and no one knows just who. Write down what you witnessed, even if it won't convince, because the truth that changes everything is often found like this. Ooh.
Thank you for listening to the first part of this important Veritas episode. To hear the rest and access all of our exclusive content, head over to the Veritas Plus member section or click the subscribe button at veritas7.com. While you're there, don't forget to visit the Veritas store, featuring a range of great products, including Focus Life Force Energy. Experience the benefits with a 15-day free trial of FLFE, no credit card required. Want to get in touch? Be a guest on the program, suggest someone, or share feedback? Just click the contact button at veritas7.com. Thank you for listening to Veritas, because you don't want to believe, you want to know.